The Chinese orphan who became an American Civil War hero. Part 2. The Soldier. Chapter 5. Lincoln's Call. February 12, 1864. Nearly 3 years had passed since Confederate guns opened fire on Fort Sumter. America had become a nation of mourning. Nearly every town in the North carried the scars of war. Store windows displayed casualty lists. Churches held funeral services almost every week. Young men who had marched off in bright new uniforms now returned with empty sleeves, or not at all. Edward de Cohota was about 19 years old. The frightened orphan who had crossed the Pacific hidden below the deck of a merchant ship was gone. In his place stood a confident young man raised in Massachusetts. He had learned the language. He had embraced the customs of his adopted home. Now he intended to defend it. On that winter day, Edward enlisted in Company 1 of the 23rd Massachusetts Volunteer Infantry. No one compelled him to serve. He was not yet an American citizen. No law required his sacrifice. He volunteered because he believed this country was his home. The Army issued him a blue wool uniform, a kepi cap, a Springfield rifle. From that moment forward, he would be judged not by where he had been born, but by whether he could stand firm beside the men in his company. Chapter 6. Brothers in Blue. Army life transformed civilians into soldiers with astonishing speed. Long days of drilling, cleaning weapons, learning formations, endless inspections. The officers demanded discipline because discipline saved lives. Edward's fellow soldiers soon discovered something important. He worked as hard as anyone. He complained less than most. He earned trust the oldest way imaginable, by doing his duty. Within Company 1, the young Chinese immigrant became simply another Massachusetts volunteer. Around the campfires, differences faded. The men spoke of families waiting at home, of sweethearts, of farms, of shops, of dreams postponed until peace returned. Every soldier understood that tomorrow could be his last sunrise. Chapter 7. Into Virginia. In the spring of 1864, Union General Ulysses S. Grant launched a relentless campaign against Robert E. Lee's Army of Northern Virginia. Unlike previous commanders, Grant refused to retreat after bloody battles. If one road failed, he simply marched south and attacked again. The campaign became one of constant movement and constant fighting. Edward's regiment entered Virginia knowing they were marching into one of the bloodiest chapters of the Civil War. The forests echoed with cannon fire. Roads dissolved into mud beneath thousands of boots. Smoke hung over the landscape like an endless storm cloud. Every day brought another march, another skirmish, another battlefield, another list of names that would never answer roll call again. Chapter 8. Drury's Bluff. May 16, 1864. 2nd Drury's Bluff. The fighting erupted with terrifying speed. Artillery shells burst overhead. Musket fire rolled across the fields in crashing waves. Visibility vanished beneath thick clouds of black powder smoke. Orders could barely be heard. Men loaded and fired almost by instinct. Edward pressed forward with Company 1. Then came a moment he would later remember for the rest of his life. Bullets ripped through his clothing. One, then another, then another. By the time the fighting subsided, 7 bullets had passed through his uniform. His coat was shredded, his equipment damaged, yet somehow, not one bullet entered his body. His comrades stared in disbelief. Some joked that the young Chinese soldier possessed extraordinary luck. Others quietly thanked Providence. Edward never claimed either explanation. He simply straightened his torn uniform, picked up his rifle, and prepared for the next battle, because there would always be another battle. Chapter 9. Cold Harbor. Only weeks later, the Army reached Cold Harbor. June 3, 1864, one of the darkest mornings in American military history. Union soldiers advanced across open ground toward heavily fortified Confederate positions. Within minutes, thousands fell. Veterans later recalled that the firing was so intense that men could scarcely lift their heads above the earth. Edward advanced with his regiment into that storm of lead. A Confederate bullet struck him. For an instant, he thought the end had come. Instead, the bullet merely grazed his scalp. Pain shot across his head. Blood trickled down his face.
The wound left a permanent part in his hair, a small scar he carried for the remainder of his life. But the battle was far from over. All around him, the cries of wounded men rose above the thunder of musket fire. One of those voices belonged to Private William Lowe, a fellow soldier from the 23rd Massachusetts. Lowe had been shot through the jaw. Unable to move, he lay exposed on the battlefield as bullets tore through the grass around him. Many soldiers could do little more than hug the earth and pray for darkness. Edward made a different choice. Ignoring the danger to himself, he left what little cover he had, reached his wounded comrade, and dragged him to the shelter of a large rock. There, beneath relentless enemy fire, he remained with Lowe until help could reach them. It was an act of courage that expected no reward, only the determination that no fellow soldier should be left behind. William Lowe survived that terrible day. More than 60 years later, the two aging veterans would meet again, their reunion a living reminder of a debt that had never been forgotten. Compared with the fate of so many others, Edward considered himself fortunate. Many of the men who entered Cold Harbor never walked away. Edward did, but no one who survived those fields remained unchanged. War always leaves its mark. Sometimes upon the body, always upon the soul.
Chapter 10. The Long March. Summer turned into autumn. Autumn became winter. The Union armies pressed ever closer to Richmond. The 23rd Massachusetts endured exhausting marches, disease, rain, mud, hunger, endless fatigue. The excitement that had once surrounded enlistment disappeared. War became routine. Every soldier developed his own method of enduring. Some relied upon humor, some upon faith, some simply focused upon surviving one more day. Edward quietly carried out every assignment entrusted to him. He had crossed an ocean as a child. Now he crossed battlefields with the same determination. Chapter 11. Victory. April 1865. Richmond fell. Only days later, General Robert E. Lee surrendered at Appomattox Courthouse. 4 years of civil war had finally come to an end. Church bells rang across the North. Families celebrated in the streets. Flags appeared from windows that had long displayed black mourning ribbons. For the surviving soldiers, victory brought mixed emotions. The Union had been preserved. Slavery was ending. But hundreds of thousands of Americans were dead. Entire generations had been forever changed. Edward had entered the Army as an immigrant teenager seeking to defend his adopted homeland. He emerged as a veteran of America's greatest trial. His service had proven something important, not merely to others, but perhaps to himself. He belonged. Chapter 12. A Soldier's Choice. With peace restored, many volunteers eagerly returned home. Some resumed farming, others reopened shops. Many simply wanted to forget the war. Edward tried returning to civilian life. He sought work as a sailor. Opportunities proved uncertain. Then came one of the most unusual turning points in his remarkable life. While celebrating with former comrades, Edward reportedly joined in an evening of drinking. By the following morning, he discovered that he had signed enlistment papers for the regular army. Whether impulsive or simply accepting the path that destiny placed before him, he honored that commitment. The decision would shape the next 30 years of his life. The Civil War had ended, but Edward de Cohota's service to the United States was only beginning. The young volunteer would become a career soldier. He would ride westward across the frontier. He would witness another chapter of American history. And he would discover that loyalty to a nation did not always guarantee that the nation would return that loyalty. To be continued.